it's interesting that we have access to those studies, and then in a culture like the United States, we're still trying to, I don't know, have that level of control over people's autonomy and sexual desires. Like, we're still trying to be super skeptical of pleasure and say if it feels good, then it's probably bad for you. It makes you weak because you're succumbing to your pleasures
Right.
instead of like, no, I'm here to enjoy the human experience. And especially if you look at female anatomy, like you literally have all of these like sensors concentrated in one place that is purely for pleasure. Like, why is that there? There's no other function. So how do you tell me that that's innately wrong or a mistake? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. The war on masturbation is
Yes.
just one of the craziest things ever. As recently as 100 years ago, that they were the leading experts on parenting were telling parents that, well, if your little girl touches her clitoris, you need to pour carbolic acid on her clitoris,
Oh my
acid,
God.
to teach her not to touch it. And if your little boy is masturbating too much, you need to sew the foreskin of his
Mm.
penis closed with wire, wire sutures, so that when he gets an erection, it'll cause so much pain that it'll stop him from wanting to be aroused. That's barbaric. I mean,
Yeah.
that's straight up child abuse.
Yeah.
And yet 100 years ago, that was in the leading best-selling, parenting books. And the entire fucking Kellogg cornflakes and graham
Holy
crackers,
cow.
all that stuff was to stop boys from masturbating because it tasted so bland that it would somehow make them not want to jerk off. I don't really understand the
No,
connection,
so
but
I saw that the other day, and I had no idea. So Dr. Kellogg was a freak, and like not in a good way, like just like a bad dude. And I guess what happened was is he was really championing genital mutilation within the states. We weren't necessarily comfortable doing it to girls, but we were okay doing it to boys. So he was really endorsing circumcision because he thought that by desensitizing the tip of the penis, it would lead to a reduction in masturbation. And
right.
then because we weren't like fully mutilating the children, he's like, well, I'll introduce a kid's product, a breakfast product, cornflakes, that will help reduce sexual desire via there's something in corn that lowers your testosterone in both boys and girls, and that's a huge driver for sexual function. So he was essentially trying to sterilize and desensitize children through breakfast foods, which is fucking insane. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah. Yeah. you know, People have trouble, like, a lot of your questions are like, well, why this totally crazy seeming thing? Why is it so prevalent? And I
Right.
think the really uncomfortable realization that I want to arrive at, but it's pretty necessary to understand things, is that we live in a pathological society. The American society and Western civilization in general are pathological. They're sick. And so when you're living in a society, the values of which are objectively pathological, that's a very difficult place to be because you can't trust what you're told. You can't even trust what's already in your own head because from childhood, before you had any critical capacities, you've been told, don't touch your body, don't touch yourself, that's ugly,
Mm.
don't look at her like with any kind of desire, that's toxic masculinity, don't enjoy anything because pleasure is the devil's playground. I mean, holy shit, there's so much misinformation being fed to children about, go to sleep right now, I don't care if you're not tired, eat right now, I don't care if you're not hungry, right? Oh, you need to go to the bathroom? No, sorry, you need to wait till the end of class.
That one is insane. Like, you're instilling the sense of someone else having ownership over your body at a very young age, and like, do not be mistaken. That's exactly why it's there. It's
Right.
someone else is more in control of you than you are of you.
And also, you are disconnecting from your own body, right?
Yes.
So, whatever desire you're feeling, your hunger, your sexual desire, you need to take a dump, whatever it is, ignore it, ignore it, ignore it, ignore it. And then we get confused why people have chronic back pain or women have trouble achieving orgasm, or men are totally, can't get it up or whatever. It's like, well, of course, we've cut all the communication between the mind and the body. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, there are going to be all these problems. Of course, anxiety and stress are going to manifest in the body in ways that we don't understand because we don't feel it happening because we're not monitoring our bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, this will probably be the next book I write, is about this deep distrust of pleasure and how it manifests in all sorts of health problems. And the basic idea is that if we learn to embrace our pleasure, we'll have much better health. And we don't need to, worry about, did you walk 10,000 steps, or how many calories did you eat, or blah, 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 all this bullshit. Because I think ironically, a lot of the health advice that we get in the United States is based upon this idea that the body is the enemy and pleasure is dangerous. And so as long as we see our bodies as suspicious, enemies, then there's internal conflict is never going to lead to a good place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's based on this sort of puritanical view of pleasure and the body.
That book sounds fascinating. I really do hope that you write it, because to me, it just makes sense, right? If you're kind of barricading an access point, an entire energy structure, of course, it's going to create disease throughout the rest of the body. Like, you're literally trying to shut it down, and it just doesn't seem healthy. And when you look at the studies around ED specifically, a lot of it's linked towards shame. So I'm sure you probably know, not Dr. Nicole Prousey. Or
Mm-mm.
Prouse. No.
No.
She's friends with Dr. David Lay, and
Oh, I
I
know
think,
him.
yeah, so I think that's how I found a lot of her work. And then Jamie Wheel had mentioned some of her work in his book Recapture the Rapture. So I was like, who is this
Right.
woman? I need to see what she's studying. And a lot of, when it came to people that were self-identified porn or sex addicts, or people that had a lot of ED, it was coupled with a more conservative upbringing and this idea of shame being linked to pleasure. So it's
Right.
almost like a subconscious thing that's shutting down your body's physiology and being able to function. It's not like it's the boogeyman in your head. Like, there's no real problem. It's not the porn. It's not the sex. It's not anything else. It's like, you just need to free yourself from this cage
Yeah.
that you've been put in.
Yeah. David Lay is great. I've had him on
I
my
love him.
podcast a couple of times. There's a film by a Spanish filmmaker, one of my favorite film directors, Luis Buñuel. What's it called? I forget the name of the film, but it begins, he was doing films in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I think his last film might have been in the early 70s. He was a surrealist filmmaker. His films are fucking bizarre, really strange. But this one that I'm thinking of, it opens at a dinner party. And all these people are sitting around the table, maybe 15, 20 people sitting around the table. And they're all the most respectable members of society. Like the bishop is there, and the general, and the mayor, and and they're all their fancy wives, and they're all these fancy, wonderful people, and they're all ha 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 ha, ha, and they're all sitting there, but there are no plates on the table. So you kind of you're watching this thing happening, and you're like, okay, this is obviously a dinner party, and they're drinking wine, but there are no plates or anything. And there's all this polite conversation happening, all this small talk. And the camera pans back, and you see that everyone's sitting on toilets. And they're all sitting around on toilets around this table. And then someone says, oh, please excuse me for a moment. And they get up and pull their pants up and they go into this little room, and they sit down, and there's food there, and they eat the food, and all shamefully eat this food. And then they wipe their faces, and then they go back out and take their pants down and sit on the toilets again. And the point is, this shit's totally arbitrary. Who decided eating is something we all do, at a party, and shitting is something we all do? Oh no, go hide that, pretend it doesn't happen, pretend we're not animals. It's ridiculous.